Good morning, everybody. Whoops, screen tilt. There we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar. I'm Chloe Tetro. I am the health coach here with Ready Care. And for this morning, we're going to look at the topic of who do you think you are? So what I mean by that is the psychology and neuroscience of our self-perception, our self-image, and how both of these things, or that kind of mash of the two of those things, compound to being able to achieve our goals or make those a lot more difficult for ourselves. So we're going to look at what self-image is, what's happening under the hood, so what is happening in the brain, and a brief introduction to the psychology of self-image. How do we perceive that self-image? How is it helping us or hindering us? And then finally, I'll end, as I always try to do, with a few practical steps of how to take away some of the things that I'll be chatting about in my best auctioneer voice for today, and how to take some of that away into the week for yourself to have a play around with. So to begin with, let's have a quick look at what is self-image. So our self-image, if I was to put a definition on it, it's the deeply ingrained belief and perceptions that we hold about ourselves, which play a significant role in shaping our behaviours, particularly when it comes to health. So I'll be kind of tying a lot of the things that I say back to health, but they can be transferable to lots of different things. And also, if you guys have any questions or comments at any point during this presentation, feel free to pop them into the chat. So with working with clients, I've observed time and again how a person's self-perception can either propel them towards their goals or can act as this kind of barrier, which holds them back from achieving health and wellness goals that they may have, or just personal goals. And I can see this in my own life with myself as well. So as I always say, I'm a big mea culpa with these things. So we're going to have a look at how self-image is formed, how it influences our behaviours, and most importantly, really, we're going to have a look at how we can challenge and reshape these to better serve our long-term interests. When there's a little bit more understanding of some of the science behind self-image and its kind of psychological underpinnings, you'll then be able to feel a bit more empowered, I hope, to take control of your narrative and make more lasting changes. And I often find understanding why, or the mechanism of things, it's not the be all and end all. We can very much go through life purely experientially, but understanding the mechanisms I've found in my own life and with clients, be it in kind of more personal coaching or in health coaching. Understanding mechanics, what it can do is take away some of the self-blame that we place on ourselves and some of the meaning making around failures. Because if you understand that, okay, this is really following a linear logical step of how the brain works, or this is really following a linear logical step of how human development works. I can see how my early life may have impacted how I view the world. And now I can see where I'm left with particular tools in my hands of going, well, these aren't really the best ones for the job that I'm looking for, but I don't have to stay with those. And sometimes not understanding, how these progress and how these evolve throughout our lifetime from a physiological standpoint and a psychological standpoint, it can kind of keep us stuck in what I call first person, right? So it's like when you're playing a video game, you can either see the screen as if you were looking through the eyes of the player, or you can choose what's called, I think it's called, if there's people that play video games more than me, because I'm not great at that, second person or third person, where basically you zoom out and you can see the character run. And similarly, when we're looking at ourselves, we can either experience this, as we do most of the day, is through the eyes of, I'm so fused with the experience that I can't actually detach myself and be able to have a look at behaviours, have a look at how things might be serving me, because I'm too fused with the experience of it. So self-image is the internal picture you hold of yourself. It's formed from your thoughts, your beliefs, your experiences. It includes how you see yourself physically. It includes your capabilities, your worth, and your place in the world. It's as if you were to draw a big circle around yourself and go, when somebody says, tell me about you, you know, in those interviews when they're like, tell me about you, or if you're ever to reference as me, I, it's inclusive of all of these different things. And that might seem like I'm kind of laboring the point and going, yeah, Chloe, I get what's meant by self-image. But really, you'd be surprised sometimes what is included and what isn't. So the important point with this particular presentation is self-image is not static. It's not, you know, you're in it for life. You know, how you viewed yourself previously is stuck. And that's the experience we can sometimes find ourselves in, is that we feel like we're stuck in it, that there's no way out. This is who I am. This is who I've always been. This is who I will always be. And even saying that, how that makes us feel. Instead, it evolves over time based on the stories we tell ourselves and the feedback we receive from others. And self-talk is exceedingly important. It's really how you're shaping. Think of like every time you speak to yourself. I've found this really helpful, and I found it very helpful with clients. Picture yourself 6 years old and the way that you're speaking to yourself, and think to yourself, if I were to speak to a 6-year-old the way I speak to me, what behaviors are they likely to gain? And how might their emotional landscape start to be shaped? What type of thoughts might go with that? So really to bring it back to that self-talk and the feedback that we receive from others. So while self-image is this kind of dynamic, fluid thing, it can also become rigid, especially when negative experiences or beliefs remain unchallenged. And it's the unchallenging piece now that we're kind of going to dig into a little bit more. So it's essentially the blueprint for your behavior. If you see yourself as a person who struggles with sticking to healthy habits, you're going to find it harder to stick to healthy habits. There's a brilliant quote that I'm going to absolutely butcher because I can't remember who said it, but I think it was anyway. If I try to attribute it to someone, I'll probably embarrass myself. But whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And you are who you believe yourself to be. So if you go into a task thinking, I'm going to fail at this, your whole being, and we're going to look at why in a second, your whole being is going to conspire to make you correct. So if you go into a presentation and go, I'm going to make an absolute mess of this, and you've been thinking that for days, you're way more likely to start to gain behaviors that will prove yourself correct. If you view yourself as somebody very capable of making positive changes, you're more likely to engage in behaviors that reinforce the belief. Now, you may have heard of Simon Sinek. He is a coach, a consultant, someone that's written many books in organizational psychology as well. And he's got a little tagline, which is find your why. You know, what is the motivation and the purpose behind why you're doing it? How can you tie that to your experiences? How can you really reward yourself with something meaningful? So at the heart of what he is, saying is finding motivation through why. Now, even though that's very, very valuable, where neuroscience-based and psychological, developmental research or up-to-date research will say, find your who, so your why is on the outer ring, your who is really the essence. It's the nuclear core reactor of how your behaviors are going to go out. Now, they tie in with each other a little bit. So let's have a quick look at the kind of what's happening under the hood aspect of things. What I mean by that is it's a car analogy, and I always use analogies that I can't back up because I'm terrible with computers and I'm terrible with cars, and yet I always lean on those types of analogies. But really, what's going on in your system? And I won't go too much into this, but it's really to give that understanding of the mechanics of things. And the takeaway from explaining the mechanics is not just for me to throw facts and figures and this and that and the other thing, but it's really to try as I say it, try it on and see, how have I experienced this in my own life? Because as I said, when you understand that there is a physiological component part to this, it's not just a failing on your behalf, but really you're working with the tools that you have. And when you understand how the tools work, it's a lot easier to, I mean, I can play the piano by smashing it, or I can play the piano by going, okay, there's incremental notes here. How do I work with that? So the way that we perceive ourselves isn't just, this kind of abstract artistic notion, although it is as well in a way. It's deeply rooted in structure and the function of our brains. So neuroscience provides us with these kind of valuable insights into how that self-image is formed and how it influences our day-to-day behaviors, especially when it comes to habits, health, and otherwise, other aspects that aren't health related. So there's a part of the brain. It's not the prefrontal cortex today, lads, although it will come into it a little bit. It's the default mode network, or how I'm going to call it as I go through this is the DMN, just to save my time and my breath and your ears. It's a network of interconnected brain regions that's most active when the brain is at rest and not focused on the outside world. And it's engaged in what's called self-referential thinking, i.e. what most of us do all day long, which is think about me, myself, my needs, my thoughts, my this, my whatever. So it plays a crucial role in how we understand ourselves. Sorry now, lads, I have a bit of a cold, which I thought I could get away with not explaining. But if you're seeing a little bit of sniffling and snorfling, apologies. So the DNM plays a crucial role in how we understand ourselves, how we process our memories and reflect on our past experiences and our future aspirations, who we are, who we've believed ourselves to be up to that point, and who we believe ourselves to be going forward. So the DNM is thought to be deeply involved in the construction and the maintenance of our self-image. Now, the key components and how it interplays. So medial prefrontal cortex, the lad is back. This area is most involved in self-referential processing, meaning it helps us think about ourselves, our traits, our emotions, our characteristics. It's where we often engage in introspection, considering our actions, motivations, and the kind of person we believe ourselves to be. There's also a part called the posterior cingulate cortex, and this region's associated with memory and retrieval. So ruminating, I suppose you'd call it, or the nostalgia of these are the memories I have. They help us to recall past events and consider how these experiences contribute to the understanding of who we are today and by default who we might be going forward. And then another region, and then I'll move on, is the angular gyrus or lateral parietal cortex. And these regions are involved in integrating information from our senses and memory, which contribute to our ability to understand ourselves in relation to the world and others. So there's quite a few parts happening in the brain that interplay with each other. So the point there being self and self-image is not just this kind of purely emotive, purely artistic, intuitive phenomenon that we experience, but it is rooted in structure, and it follows, wherever there's structure, it follows particular rules, right? So there you have parts of your brain that at rest help to interplay, help to integrate all this information to form that idea of yourself. So the DNM is active when we're not focused on the external environment, essentially when we're in our heads, when we're thinking about ourselves and our relationships and our place in the world. And that network is then responsible for the continuous narrative we create about ourselves. That's the takeaway here. This is the part you can act on. So the DNM, I'll say it again, is responsible for the continuous narrative we create about ourselves, which is the core component of our self-image. Remember, self-talk, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves become reality. So how does it shape self-image? It shapes through self-referential thinking. When it's active, that DNM, it's engaged in self-referential thinking. This is the process of reflecting on the experiences It'll help with the integration, and it'll help with imagining the future. And this is a really, really important part that I'll come back to in a while. So the DNM is also active when we imagine our future selves. And this can involve projecting your current self-image into the future, which can either limit or expand our perceived potential. If your current self-image is positive, you might imagine a future where you continue to grow, succeed, you're doing brilliantly, you're popping champagne, you're having a great time. But on the flip side, if your self-image is currently very negative, your DNM might project a future filled with limitations and failures. So it's also going to be involved in self-evaluation, and that can reinforce your currently held self-image. So given the DNM's role in maintaining our self-image, it'll also play a part in how we can change that image. So because of neuroplasticity, which I talk about all the time, but for those of you that are new to the concept, it basically means that nothing in your brain is totally fixed. As in it's static. There's always a way that we can reshape things. It just usually takes a little bit of effort. So if you're in the process of trying to change habits, change parts of yourself, and change how you view the world, yourself and those around you, and you're kind of bumping up against a little bit of, oh God, this feels exhausting, you're doing the right thing. Because essentially anything that involves changing habits, if you're in the process of changing, it feels difficult, basically, is the short way of saying that. So neuroplasticity can involve the DNM through conscious practices and visualization. So if you think about world athletes, right? Really top performers, not always athlete, but just people that are peak performers in their field. They often will utilize, and you may have heard this, visualize your goal, visualize yourself going through the steps. And the visualization aspect of things really helps with the rewiring of that default mode network and helping with neuroplasticity. By consciously engaging with our default mode network through activities like journaling, therapy is another great one, reflective exercise, we can start to rewrite our self-narrative. When we deliberately recall positive experiences or envision a more empowered future, we encourage the DNM to support a more positive self-image. And over time, this can lead to the formation of new neural pathways. Now, the psychology introduction aspect of it, and I'm always going through things fairly quickly here. So if you're ever interested in finding out more information about these things, let me know, and I can either do a quick talk on just that aspect, or I can just liaise with you directly. So while the neuroscience of things can provide the foundation for understanding how self-image is formed and maintained, it's more kind of the psychological aspect will offer tools for challenging and reshaping it, in particular part of psychology and psychosynthesis, which is the mode that I've my training in. These can provide frameworks for understanding and transforming our self-image. So when you understand limiting beliefs, they're deeply ingrained assumptions we hold about ourselves that restrict our potential. The beliefs are often developed in response to past experiences, particularly during childhood, when we're particularly impressionable and building that self-image. We start the building blocks really young, and oftentimes, unless these are challenged in our later years, whatever ones we started with when we're constructing are usually the ones that we end up carrying into our adult life. So if you've told repeatedly that you're not athletic, you might start to develop a belief that you're totally incapable of physical fitness. This can then impact you in your teenage years, where you don't want to take part in physical activities. If you're not taking part in physical activities, you might start to develop, some chronic illnesses, some putting on metabolic weight, putting on lots of different, basically adopting behaviors that really directly impact you. So that's the power of these types of beliefs. And they can really become a self-fulfilling prophecy and influence your behaviors, preventing you from fulfilling your full potential. Now, there's a little part here that I mentioned psychosynthesis, which is basically just a modality of psychotherapy and psychotherapeutic coaching, which is the modality I've been trained in. But if you're interested in looking at, you understand that how you view yourself impacts your behaviors, those behaviors impact your life and your experience of your life day to day. If you're curious about that, there is a process in psychosynthesis where people work with what's called subpersonalities. And a subpersonality is basically a way to capture what people mean when they talk about different aspects of themselves showing up in different roles. So if you're a mother, you are in mother subpersonality when you're with your children. You might adopt behaviors and traits that are more responsible, anxious, maybe. You might find yourself being a bit more anxious. You could take on particular traits of being quite, I don't know, I'll go to a negative aspect of things. You can be quite short, impatient, but then when you're at work, you're very patient. You say in work mode, in that subpersonality, I'm really helpful. I go above and beyond for people. And I really have time for everybody in the office, lunchroom. I'm the life of the party. But then in my social circles, I find myself quite quiet in my personal ones. I wait until the conversation lulls for me to bring in my opinions, and I'm quite shy about my opinions. You kind of think to yourself, okay, well, there's an awful lot of different aspects of me encapsulated in that, what I was mentioning, that circle around self. So some of them seem to be clashing with each other. And how do I make sense of all of that? So through a process of self-reflection called working with subpersonalities, it emphasizes this integration of all these different aspects of yourself and offers a unique approach to understanding and transforming self-image that are more kind of task dependent in different roles that you're in. And you can actually integrate them across with each other if you would like to adopt certain behaviors that are across the board. So according to this particular modality, our self-image is not one single unified entity, but rather it's a collection. There's lots of different parts of these sub-personalities that come out in different aspects, depending on the role and the context that you're operating with. And each of these have their own desires, fears, and beliefs. And sometimes when you may have found it difficult to start a new behavior because there's a kind of push-pull. There's what's called a bit of cognitive dissonance. So part of you wants to do something, and then part of you really doesn't. And they're both you, and they're both yourself. And you kind of go, I don't really understand what's happening there. I don't know if it's self-sabotage. I don't know what's happening. So a really good way to work when you find yourself using the language of part of me wants this, part of me doesn't, or part of me agrees with the new structural changes at work, part of me doesn't. And you can see that that's impacting your behavior with people and within your own work. Part of me really wants to get healthy, and part of me just doesn't care. So when within you, where there exist these kind of subpersonalities, that all have different drivers and motivations, that some of you are very focused on health changes, while other parts of you might crave comfort and indulgence. So these subpersonalities can sometimes be in conflict, leading to internal struggles and that feeling of self-sabotage. So when you recognize and integrate these different parts and aspects of you, you can be more in balance and create a much more integrated and empowered self-image. And remember, all of these aspects of you have emerged as a sort of protection, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're to take the the subpersonality of, this is a very common one that people have, the straight A student, the good girl, the responsible one, the oldest child in the family, right? There's a set of behaviors that we can think of that come along with that. It's very strong. It's very, I'm in charge, I get things done. You can come to me, I'll get it sorted. And of course, that all sounds very positive, but on the flip side of that, there's, I'm exhausted, I want someone to support me. Why doesn't anybody ever ask how I'm feeling? All of these type of things come in there. And there's an awful lot of internal struggle that happen there. So when you're working with understanding your self-image, it can be really, really helpful to try to say, okay, I have different traits to myself, and I can see how they play out in different ways. And putting a separate circle around those and saying, this is my responsible older child, and this is how they act, and these are their drivers, these are their fears, these are their motivations. And they're really getting in the way of the part of me that really needs support, that wants to ask for help, that feels really overwhelmed. So if you draw a separate circle around that and say, what does that part of me really want? How can they feel more like people care about them? How can they feel more like the team supports them? How can they feel more like they're part of the family, that their needs matter as well, and that they're not just there to run the show? Because that's a very, very lonely space. So you have these two parts, and they're working not with each other at all. So really, really helpful method that I would really encourage those of you that want their self-image to work more in line with their behaviors is start a little journal exercise and describe both of those parts as if they were a separate entity, almost as if they were a part of you that might dress differently, that might speak and act differently, because essentially they do act very differently. And start to see what's important to that part. What do they need from the other part? What are their drivers? How can we get them to speak eye to eye, become like the mediator between them and say, look, this part needs to feel like things are looked after, while the other needs to feel looked after. Is there something that can be brought into my day-to-day life so that both of these feel like they're being looked after and there's a bit more synergy happening there? So when we zoom out and we reassess this kind of broader look at who we are, the types of stories we have told ourselves throughout our lives, what that means for us, and how we've started to act from those spaces. If we previously believed ourselves to be incapable with budgeting, are we going to be that person forever? No. So there's what's called as well a growth mindset, which is essentially the opposite of a fixed mindset, i.e. a fixed mindset would be who you have been is who you will always be. That's it. You're doomed to that existence forever. A growth mindset is a recognition that actually, even though it feels that way sometimes, and it does, that it isn't so. There is always the opportunity and the hope for things to change, and understanding that change can happen is actually very powerful in and of itself. So when you adopt a growth mindset, you understand that who you may have previously thought yourself to be and all of the behaviors that go along with that is not fixed. It's not who you have to be forever. The self-talk that you direct with yourself, and actually I've gone into the kind of practical steps here. There's a little bit of a mismatch. So who you believe yourself to be in terms of the stories that you tell yourself, try to capture on paper. Are there particular thoughts that I come back to about myself, particularly when I'm in a negative headspace? Things like, I'll give you some of mine that I've had in my negative thoughts. I'm useless. I can't get anything done. I'm never going to be able to finish X project. Why can't I just, etc. These type of things, and they often come from a younger part of you that was wounded, that was hurt by particular experiences, and took on those meanings about yourself. Particularly if you were quite upset about something, it almost became like this is who I am. I was once not able to finish something, so I'm always going to be that way. Really give yourself, light a few candles, be in a relaxed environment, and have a look from a really compassionate space, understanding that this is coming from a really young aspect of yourself, that there are stories you've told yourself throughout your life that may be hurting you, may be totally outdated and unfair to continue to say, and try to have a look at reshaping what those might be. You can say something like, this might have been true then, but for now, I'm doing my best to change it, or I am constantly devoted to changing myself for the better, or I accept myself as I was, and I'm looking to become even better, to have more of that, more life, more good experiences in there. Have a check about particular subpersonalities. Are there circles you can draw around that and reflect in yourself, and just write a paragraph about them? You can even name them. I know that sounds very silly, but it's actually exceedingly helpful. Give them a particular name. Have a paragraph describing what that subpersonality is like, and get to know it a little bit. And I say that quite a bit, is be an investigator of your own experiences. Pay attention. What is happening there? How might this be showing up in your life? And are there ways that you can start to integrate that part of yourself and say, okay, I know that you're trying your best to protect me, but it's getting in the way of specific ways that I would like to adopt new behaviors and changes. If there are two parts of you ill at odds with each other, are there ways that you can come to an understanding between what it needs and what the other one needs? And get really, really creative with that. And a huge one that I would really encourage people to do is actually start to visualize what yourself might be like in future, right? Give yourself an alternative to what your story has been so far. Give yourself an alternative, adopt the peak performers methodology of bringing on the default mode network, and visualize. Visualize is a really, really powerful tool for reshaping self-image because it leverages the brain's neuroplasticity. When you vividly imagine yourself succeeding in whatever goals that you have, you activate the same neural circuits, that would be engaged if you were actually performing the behavior. And over time, this can help to create new neural pathways that support a healthier self-image. If you're looking to practice visualization, find a quiet space, you won't be disturbed. Close your eyes and imagine yourself achieving and succeeding at whatever change it may be. It may be having more confidence. It may be, looking after your health. It may be feeling less stressed around work. Picture yourself in that, and try to push as much sensory experience and information. Visualize what it would look like, any particular sounds there, any particular textures, how you feel, your emotions, your thoughts. The more information you give yourself, the more you practice, the more real it's going to feel, and the more your brain will begin to associate these positive behaviors with your new self-image. And remember, this is the core nuclear reactor by which all of your other behaviors, your thoughts, your emotions are going to start coming from. And the more you repeat something, the more ingrained it becomes, the more integrated it's going to become. So you will give yourself evidence, and you're going to be on the lookout for evidence as to, oh yeah, I was actually quite confident. Every time you get new evidence to support your new self-belief, your new self-image, the more ingrained it becomes, and the more those behaviors are going to flow. I know I've gone a little bit over time there. Sorry, guys, because I was covering quite a bit. If you have any questions or any comments, I'm always very, very happy to receive them. I hope you found that helpful, and I know I went through quite a bit there in terms of self-image. The major takeaway here is your words have power. Your narrative has power. Consciously construct and curate who it is that you would like to become going forward. Look at aspects of yourself that might be in dissonance with each other, and really, really give yourself full awareness. Make them little characters. It can be great fun, and actually quite funny to go, God, I am very, very in my bossy subpersonality in this particular environment. And really try to integrate all of these, knowing that your being, whether it's psychological or neurological, is always conspiring to make yourself correct about who you believe yourself to be, right? That's me. I need to stop talking now. I hope you found that helpful, guys. Andrew will be back with you guys next week. In the meantime, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will be talking to you in 2 weeks' time. And mind yourself. Haha. See you again. Bye.